Good morning. Am I on the mic? Just turn down a little bit. I'm going to try this. Brian said I don't know, some people noticed it and some people didn't. I heard it on the live stream, but I think it was last Sunday morning. Something was going on with the lapel mic, and it did it a little bit in Bible class, but then during worship hour it was crazy. So I don't know what was going on with Brian. Said he thinks he's got that figured out. So if y'all start hearing something strange, or I get this gravelly voice or something, apparently that's what it was doing, because several people said something about it, and I went and looked at the live stream, and it was I don't know what was going on, but anyway, so if you start hearing that, or if maybe, I don't know, if somebody might happen to be watching this on the live stream, if you hear something, let me know, and I can always go to the pulpit or the Lord's table mic. We are studying the book of Judges, getting near the end of this study. If I can get there. We left off, we finished chapter 16, which of course also concludes the account of Samson and his life. Samson is one of, I've never actually gone and added up the verses, but he very well may be the judge with the most actual text written about him. And we've noticed that several times, that sometimes you have a judge that just kind of mentions him almost in passing. And then sometimes you get a lot of detail. Gideon, there's a fair amount of detail with Gideon. Gideon, he might rank right up there with Samson if you count the story of Abimelech and what happened with Abimelech, which kind of involved, Gideon's family. So it's sort of concluding his account. But anyway, be that as it may, we finished up chapter 16. Now, I wanted to mention, I believe we hit this right at the very end of class last week, that the remainder of the book of Judges, is almost like a section of appendices. You have almost like Appendix A in chapter 17, Appendix B in chapter 18, and what you're really going to get from these appendices, if you want to look at it that way, or these chapters, it's going to show just how depraved the conditions were at this point in Israel's history. We've often said, Judges, what do we call it? The Dark Ages of Israel. There's a lot of stuff going on that just kind of makes you shake your head and makes you just, turns your stomach. A lot going on here that should not be. And of course, one of the things that we mentioned in the very outset of this study was Judges shows life when you go away from God. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And you're going to see that in verse 6 of this next chapter, chapter 17. You're going to see it again over in the end of the book, chapter 21. And that's what the book is showing us. When there's no, when you go away from God, there's really, it becomes literally a slippery slope of just falling away. And Romans 1 is going to detail that as well, from a Gentile perspective. Here you see it from the Jews' perspective. Romans 1, we'll look at it as the Gentiles, as they rejected God. They went away from God. They didn't want to retain God in their knowledge, he says. And so God gave them over to a reprobate mind. And they just, the slippery slope went on and on and on. So you're going to see in this section, you're going to see idolatry. You'll see superstition, false religion, rape, homosexuality, disrespect for the marriage relationship, internal hostility between tribes, maybe just call it civil war. There's a lot in this section that's just, it's not pretty, but it's the reality of life when you go away from God and his standard. So bear that in mind as we go through this. This is going to illustrate the extent of their apostasy and just how far they've slipped in going away from God. That said, let's go into chapter 17. This is Micah and his priest. There's this man, you may recall, it's not been recent, but it's not been just terribly long ago either, I don't believe, that we preached, or I preached a sermon we studied on a Sunday morning about Micah and his homemade religion. That was the name of that sermon. And that's pretty much what this is. This is homemade religion. He's just doing his own thing. And of course, that's the theme of the book of Judges, by and large, people just doing their own thing. And so this man Micah, he's of Mount Ephraim, he says to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, about which you cursed, and spake also in mine ears, behold, the silver is with me, I took it. And so his mother says, blessed be thou the Lord, my son. When he had restored the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she says, I had wholly dedicated that silver to make a graven image and a molten image. Now, therefore, I will restore it unto thee. Does anybody know the difference in a graven image and a molten image? I don't know that I'd ever really given this much thought, but there is a slight distinction. A graven image will be something that you may carve something out and then overlay it with silver or gold or whatever it may be. It could even be bronze, I suppose, something like that. Typically silver, I think, with most of these idols. Whereas a molten image was just the solid metal, and it was molten out of that metal. I'd never really given that much thought, but there you can tell there's a distinction there, and that's basically what it is. So Micah restores this money that he stole from his mother, and so she says, oh, blessed be thou of the Lord, and they're using Jehovah, the name Jehovah, and you see that you just get, sometimes you read this section, you just, what is going on? I mean, they're mixing the name of the Lord with this superstitious idolatry, and you just, again, you just see why we call it the Dark Ages. So he restores the money. Verse 4, she took 200 shekels of the silver, gave them to the founder, who made a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. So he's got his little gods now, so-called. The man Micah had an house of gods and made an ephod and teraphim and consecrated one of his sons, who became his priest. Now Micah's from where, verse 1? Ephraim. Now, what did the law have to say about Ephraimites being priests? Not a word, right? I mean, they couldn't be priests. They were ruled out by exclusion by the fact that Moses, God through Moses, had specified Levites are to be priests. But hey, when you got homemade religion, you just do what you want. And so he wants his wants one of his sons to be his priest. So he says, hey, congratulations, you've become a priest to me. He's got this ephod, this teraphim, and so he makes his son his priest. And of course, verse 6, in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Every time I read this account, I read verse 6, it's almost like inspiration, the Holy Spirit through whoever the human penman was, perhaps Samuel, says to us, it's almost as if they're saying to us, P.S., God didn't approve of this. Just so you know, I'm giving you this account so you'll see what happens when there was no king and everybody's just doing whatever he thinks is right in his own eyes. Everybody's just doing his own thing. Lest anyone read this account, and I don't think anyone necessarily would, but lest we read it and think, God's approving of this. No, this is what happened when everybody just did their own thing, kind of spiritual anarchy. There was a young man out of Bethlehem, Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. So now you got a Levite comes into town. And so the man departed out of the city from Bethlehem, Judah, to sojourn where he could find a place. He came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. Micah asked him where he's coming from, and he tells him he's a Levite. Then Micah says, hey, dwell with me, right there in verse 10, and be unto me a father and a priest, and I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by the year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. So the Levite went in. Again, he's got a Levite now, but he's still not doing this according to the law, right? Superstitious. And in fact, he's going to go on. It says the Levite was content to dwell with the man. The young man was unto him as one of his sons. Micah consecrated the Levite. The young man became his priest, was in the house of Micah. Then said Micah, Now know I that the Lord will do me good, seeing I have a Levite to my priest. This superstitious belief that, well, God's going to bless me now because I have a Levite for my priest. One of the funniest things I've seen in a long, long time, after I preached that sermon, Micah sent me a text. I don't know if you remember that, Micah. Micah sent me a text, and he said, now know I that the Lord will do me good, seeing I have a Dollahite to my priest. But he thinks that, the Lord's going to bless him just because he's got a Levite. He's doing this completely contrary to how God had said through Moses to worship and to carry out the law of Moses and to follow the law. But hey, I got a Levite, so God's going to bless me. It's kind of like, if somebody were to say, well, they could be partying, they could be doing all kinds of things against what God would have them to do, and they said, well, we got a preacher here with us, so everything's going to be all right. But it's not. You see the superstitious belief here. So he thinks God's just going to bless him because he's got a Levite. But there's so much in here that you see with the idolatry, the superstition. The mother put a curse. She had given some kind of a curse about this money that had been stolen. So again, trying to mix true worship and superstition. She thinks God's going to be pleased with her that she was going to make an image. And you see this sometimes throughout Israel's history, where they want to worship Jehovah, but they want to worship him through an image. And yet one of the Ten Commandments was, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. You don't do that. Because God is not, you can't bring him down into some kind of a fleshly, tangible image. So here you have Micah, and he pays this Levite to be his priest, and he thinks now that God's going to bless him. By the way, we'll see this. I don't want to get too much into that because we're coming to it in the not too distant future. But you'll see this again in 1 Samuel 4, this superstitious belief when they lose a battle and somebody says, oh, let's go send for the Ark of the Covenant. We lost the battle because we don't have our lucky charm. Go get the Ark of the Covenant and we'll win the battle. And of course, what happens? Spoiler alert, but what happens? The ark gets captured. Not only did they lose again, the ark gets taken. And, everybody's just, woe is me, the world's falling apart because the ark's been taken. And God is trying to drive home a message to them. The problem is not you didn't have the ark. The problem is you didn't have God with you because you weren't following God. And so, Micah thinks he's going to be blessed here, even though he's doing all these things against the law. He thinks he's going to be blessed just simply because he has a Levite. Chapter 18. This is kind of dealing with the Danite migration. Here's another reminder. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day, all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel. Now, this is a little bit confusing, and I don't know that anybody has a 100% for certain answer. Verse 1 may be an indication of how long it took for them to complete a complete assimilation into the land. There's some background in Joshua 19. We've already studied that. But, if you look at, there's another verse. Let me find it. You've got a reference in Judges 13:25 about the camp of Dan, and if you consider that, also verse 12 of this chapter, they went up, pitched in Kirjath Jearim in Judah, wherefore they called that place Mahanadan unto this day. Behold, it is behind Kirjath Jearim. You put all that together, it seems like what's happening here in chapter 18 is happening prior to the days of Samson. So, again, remember, Judges is not written necessarily to be a chronological account. It's giving accounts of different ones of these champions. And really, we're in a whole different section of the book of Judges even now that's not meant to even give necessarily accounts of these champions. It's meant to be more like an appendix to tell you, hey, here's just how bad things got at times during those dark ages of Israel. So I don't know that I can give you a 100% for sure answer, because you read that and you just sort of assume we're here at the end of Judges. They've been in the land for a long time. Sometimes they're becoming oppressed by the people in the land because they didn't drive them out to begin with, right? And they turn to their idols and they intermarry and things like that. And then they cry out to God, and God sends a champion, and the champion delivers them. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this, you got the Danites who appear to be trying to conquer the land and take their inheritance. And it seems confusing, but if you remember the fact that it's not meant to be chronological, it may be that they had conquered the land and they've lost some, and now they're trying to get it back. I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of possible explanations. And, of course, if there's a possible explanation and it's plausible, then there's not any kind of discrepancy or contradiction. But it's one of those things that would be interesting if we could know. And I think possibly the best explanation is this goes back even prior to the days of Samson, and this very well may be as they're assimilating into the land from the get-go. So, when you get to verse 2, the children of Dan sent of their family 5 men from their coast, men of valor, from Zorah, from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. They said unto them, Go search the land. Who, when they came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, they lodged there. And this is the Micah from chapter 17, of course. So they were by the house of Micah. They knew the voice of the young man, the Levite. We don't know how. They recognized his voice. Somehow they knew him. They turned in thither, said unto him, Who brought thee hither? Who brought you here? And what are you doing here? Is essentially what they say. How did you come to be here? And what's going on? Why are you still here? So he tells them, this is what Micah, we've come up with a deal here. He's hired me, and I'm his priest. And so they get him to ask counsel of God to know whether the way they're going is going to be prosperous, whether things are going to go well. Again, there seems to be some kind of almost a superstitious thing here, like it's an oracle. It may be that they're really asking him, thinking he's the Levite. He can ask counsel of God and find out, is their way going to be prosperous? It may very well be that there's this superstitious idea that, you see sometimes in movies and books, the Greek so-called gods, they would have these oracles, and they would go to them to dispense, to have advice dispensed unto them. It almost seems like something like that. I don't want to read too much into it, but it certainly would fit in with the context of this section. But the priest says, Go in peace. The Lord is, before the Lord is your way, wherein you go. God's going to bless you. Go in peace. I don't know. I don't know if he really got that answer or if he's just giving them that answer and he happened to be right. It may be that God did give him that answer. God has worked through stranger circumstances, right? I recall one time where God spoke truth through the mouth of a donkey who actually spoke. So, sometimes people get tripped up here and they say, well, why? If indeed God did answer, why would he answer through this priest who's an unauthorized, he's not doing what he's supposed to do? Well, God's worked through stranger circumstances. So anyway, the 5 men depart. They come to Laish. They see the people that are there. Those people are, they're careless. They're quiet. They're secure, the King James has. No magistrate in the land. They're too far from the Zidonians to get any help from them. And they don't really have any business with anybody. They're just to themselves. So they came to their brethren, to Zorah, to Eshtaol, and the brethren asked, tell us what's going on. What's the deal here? And so they tell them, we need to get up and go and attack these people. The land is very good. Why are you still sitting here? Is basically what they say. Let's go possess the land. And when you go, you'll come to a people secure. Verse 10 says, a large land, God's given it into your hands, a place there's no want of anything that is in the earth. And so they go. 600 men, verse 11 tells us, appointed with weapons of war. They went up, they pitched in Kirjath-jearim in Judah, and we noticed that verse just a moment ago. They passed thence unto Mount Ephraim and came into the house of Micah. Then answered the 5 men that went to spy out the country of Laish. These are the original 5 men in the first part of the chapter. And they said to their brethren, Do you know there's in these houses an ephod and a teraphim and a graven image and a molten image? Now therefore consider what you have to do. They turn there and they come to the house of this Levite, and of course it's the house of Micah who's hired the Levite. They saluted him. The 600 men, they stood by the entering of the gate. And the 5 men go up, and they come there, and they take the graven image, the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. And the priest stood in the entering of the gate with the 600 men that were appointed with weapons of war. These go into Micah's house. They fetch the carved image, the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. And so the priest, of course, his natural reaction is, what are you doing? The end of verse 18. And they say, hey, you just hold your peace. Lay your hand upon your mouth and go with us. You're better off being a father and a priest to one man, the house of one man, or to be a priest unto a tribe and a family in Israel. Hey, man, how about a promotion? We're offering you a promotion. You can come and advance to a bigger congregation, right? So he says, you better off being a priest to one household or to an entire tribe. So they turned and departed. Verse 20. The priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod, the teraphim, and the graven image, went in the midst of the people. So they turn, they depart. They got their little ones, the cattle, the carriage before them. They're a good way from the house of Micah. The men in the houses near to Micah's house were gathered together. They overtook them. They realized now their stuff has been taken, stolen from them. And so they overtake them. They cry unto the children of Dan. They turn their faces and they say, what? Verse 23, the end of that verse, to paraphrase it, they say, what's your problem? What's your deal that you're coming with such a company? You look like you're coming to start trouble. And Micah says, you've taken away my gods which I made, and the priests, and you're gone away, and what have I more? And what is this that you're saying to me, what aileth me? He says, what do you mean, what's my problem? Are you dumb? You took my stuff. You took my priest. What do you think my problem is? And the children of Dan say to him, let not thy voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon thee, and thou lose thy life with the lives of thy household. I said, man, you might want to keep it down, because some of these fellows back here hear you. They're not going to be too happy about that. They're liable just to run you through. You might want to keep it down, Micah. The children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back unto his house. Well, man, he's mad, he's upset, but what you going to do when you're outnumbered, you're outgunned? He says, you live to fight another day, as we say sometimes. So they took the things Micah made, the priest which he had. They go to Laish, to the people that were quiet, secure. They smote them with the edge of the sword and burnt the city with fire. There was no deliverer because they were too far from Zidon, as we said before. They had no business with anybody. And it was in the valley that lieth by Beth-Rahab. And they built a city and dwelt therein. They called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born unto Israel. And the name of the city was Laish at the first. The children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests of the tribe of Dan unto the day of the captivity of the land. And they set them up Micah's graven image, which he made all the time that the house of God. Where you just read it and you just shake your head. You don't. It's kind of like with Abimelech. If you recall that account, what was it, Judges 7? Where Abimelech is dealing treacherously with his own brethren. He kills his own brethren, some of them half-brothers. And then he's basically sets himself up as king. And you don't really like Abimelech. But then this other fellow, I just went blank, Gael maybe? That doesn't sound right. But anyway, this other fellow, he's kind of running his mouth against being cocky and arrogant, and he gets sort of put in his place by Abimelech, and you don't really feel sorry for the other guy either. That's kind of what I see and how I feel when I read this account. It's hard to feel sorry for Micah, right? I mean, he's into this superstitious idolatry, and he just kind of wanting to do everything his own little way. But I don't really sympathize with the Danites either, because they just steal from the man. Might makes right kind of mentality. Well, nobody likes a thief. They just go in and steal it. They stole his Levite. I'm not saying he was right for even having the Levite there, but they still stole from him. And then when he came and called them on the carpet for it, they just kind of say, hey, we got more people than you. We're stronger than you. Get over it. If you want to do something about it, go ahead, but we're just going to kill you. And so off they go. And they conquer this area, and then they set up their tribe there, and then they set up this false worship. It's just strange. And it's interesting, they're getting to verses 30 and 31. Here's another kind of confusing area, because it says Jonathan the son of Gershom. Was this the young Levite's name, or did they get somebody else? And this is his name. Also, is this a copyist error? Some people say this is a copyist error because they say it should say Jonathan the son of Gershom, the son of Moses. It would take just a slight miscopying to turn Moses into Manasseh. Hebrew is, I've told you before, I know next to nothing about Hebrew, but I've seen the letters and sometimes the difference in one word to another. And in English, you say, how do you get Manasseh from Moses? But in Hebrew, sometimes it's just a tiny little mark or something that would change a name completely or change a number. You'll see this in Chronicles and Kings, where one section will say Solomon had like 400 stalls, and one will say 4,000. It's just a tiny little speck-looking mark in the Hebrew that would be the difference in that. So, sometimes people say, oh, there's a contradiction in the Bible. But it's not a contradiction. It's clearly seen to be a copyist error. That may be what this is, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses. I don't know that, Moses was a Levite, so it could have been a descendant of his. We just don't know. And there seems to be another copyist error in the verse Robert just mentioned, verse 31, because, it says all the time, at the end of verse 30, until the day of the captivity of the land. Well, the day of the captivity of the land, technically, unless this is way before and it's looking to one of the oppressions of the native people. But, you think captivity and you think what? You think about, I think about either Babylonian captivity or Assyrian captivity. Of course, Egyptian captivity comes to mind too, but this will be after that. Well, the Assyrian captivity is not going to happen for hundreds of years, and the Babylonian captivity is even after that. So it seems to be a copyist error here that should be translated until the day of the captivity of the ark, because you see that's coming up in a relatively short period of time when the Ark of the Covenant will be taken. Again, that's one of those things that gets into a realm that's pretty deep and difficult study if you don't know something about the Hebrew language, but I've some folks that do suspect that may be the case, just a copyist error there from first, talking about the captivity of the ark in 1 Samuel 4. And that would fit better with the next verse, by the way, if that's the case, because he goes on and says in verse 31, they set them up Micah's graven image, which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. Well, if it's talking about the captivity of the land, you get down to the Assyrian captivity, you've got the temple built by then, and so it's not even, you're not even dealing with the tabernacle, let alone being at Shiloh. If it is right as captivity, then it's probably just prior to one of these oppressions by some of the native people that they didn't drive out to begin with. But it seems to me that the captivity of the ark will be the logical translation there, and what we have here is just a copyist error. But you may recall the house of God, the tabernacle in those days, was set up once they get into the land. That it was set up to be portable. It's a tabernacle. They could take it down. They could travel with it. When they stop, they set it back up. But once they get into the land, they're not moving anymore. And so they set it up at Shiloh for a long time. And then, of course, later on, Solomon's going to build the temple. David makes preparations. Solomon builds it. But again, the whole section is showing how In this time, Israel's trying to mix true worship, true religion, with idolatry. They try to hang on to some elements of divinely prescribed worship, but at the same time bringing in idolatrous heathen elements, such as the molten images and the superstitious belief and all of that. And, as one fellow said, truly, these are the dark ages of Israel. I mean, it's just, it's pitiful how they, and, do we not see a lot of that today? I mean, people will grab just a snippet here and there of true worship, true religion, and they mix it with things that I like or I want to do. And I mean, how many times have you maybe been in a discussion with someone or heard someone talk about something? It might be pertaining to worship, it might be pertaining to salvation, and it becomes abundantly clear, I'm hanging on to this because I like it. It's what I want to do. And, I mentioned this Wednesday night. Sometimes people would defend a guy who teaches things that go completely contrary to biblical doctrine. And people will say things like, boy, but have you heard him speak? He's such a great, interesting speaker. As if that makes it okay. And over and over again, you see that even today. People just mixing true religion with whatever they want to do. And at the end of the day, it's homemade religion. And it's all too common, even down to the present. Chapter 19, you have the atrocity at Gibeah. This is another appendix. I think earlier I mentioned 17 and 18 as appendix A and B, but really 17 and 18 go together. This would be more like appendix B here in chapter 19. Again, he reminds us there's no king in Israel in those days. There's a Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim. No reason to think this is the same Levite we've been talking about. He took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. She was unfaithful, sexually unfaithful to him, and she went away to her father's house. So she was there 4 months. One of the questions that comes to me is, why did her father take her in, especially if she had been unfaithful to her husband? He should have told her, you go back and try to make things right with your husband. But anyway, the husband arose. He went after her to speak friendly unto her, to bring her again, having his servant with him. And so they go to the woman's father's house, and when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. I don't know exactly why that is. Maybe he was tired of his daughter being there. It was time for her to go. He's rejoicing. Every time I read that, I think, why is he so happy to see her husband coming to get her? Maybe he's like, yeah, it's time for you to go home, honey. But anyway, maybe he was just happy to see his son-in-law. I don't know. I don't want to read too much into that. But the father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and so he stays there 3 days. They drank, ate, lodged, and so on the 4th day, he's getting ready to go. And the father says to his son-in-law, comfort thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward your way. I guess he's not too eager to get rid of her because he is trying to get them to hang around. So they sit down. They ate and drank, and then he says, be content, stay here all night, let your heart be merry. And the man rose up apart. He urged him again. So he lodged there again, there, verse 7. So then, 5th day, the morning, he goes to leave, and again he tries to get him to stay. And the man rose up to depart. He says, look, the day is drawing toward even. You might as well just spend the night. That's basically what he says. And then get on your way early tomorrow. But the man says, no, I'm not waiting again, is essentially what this fellow says. I've And he came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem. And he comes and when they were by Jebus, the day was far spent, verse 11 says. The servant says to his master, come, I pray thee, let us turn into this city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. His master says to him, we will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger that is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. Isn't that sad? He didn't want to stay in Jebus, Jerusalem, which is what we would call it now, because he says it's inhabited by foreigners. Now, in light of what happens, that's ironic. So he says to his servant, come, let us draw near to one of these places to lodge all night in Gibeah or Ramah. And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. And they turned aside thither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. I keep hearing something scratching. I just got a message from somebody that it was acting up again. I don't know what's going on with that. Anyway, so they go to Gibeah. They turn aside. They go in. He sits down in the street. I'm in verse 15. He sits down in the street of the city, and he sits down there because there's nobody that takes him in. There should have been people offering hospitality. They didn't have hotels back then, and so typically you would expect someone to come and invite you in. But he sits down the street and there's nobody offering. But then this old man comes from his work out of the field, and he says, he sees this man and he says, where are you going? Where are you coming from? And in verse 18 he tells him, we're passing from Bethlehem, Judah toward the side of Mount Ephraim, but I'm going now to the house of the Lord. There's nobody's taking me in. It's nighttime just practically, and nobody's taking me in. He says, look, I've got straw, I've got provender for my cattle and all those that are with me. I've got all that taken care of. I'm not going to be a burden to anybody. He says, there's bread, there's wine for me also. I got plenty. I just need a place to stay. So the old man says, don't worry about all that. You let all your wants fall upon me. I'm going to take care of you. You don't use your own stuff. Hospitality was a big thing in their culture. And so he says, just don't stay in the street. So we brought him into his house. He gave provender. He washed their feet. They ate and drank. He provided all of this for them. So now as they're making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, sons of Belial, they beset the house round about, beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. Sounds a lot like what that we read about previously? Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom particularly. So this sexual perversion with these men as well. The master of the house, he's begging them, don't do so wickedly. This man's coming to mine house. Do not this folly. And then, just the dark ages of Israel. That's all you can say. He says, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now and humble you them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. I've seen people attack this verse and they say, oh, look, God's just okay with this. God's not okay with this. This is recorded. This is not condoned. I can't imagine why this fellow decided to do this, but they didn't listen. Then the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her and abused her. They raped her all night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. Now, this is a tragic incident, but it's hard for me to see how these men are 100% innocent, at least as pertains to this concubine. I can't imagine what they were thinking doing that. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day, verse 26 says, and she fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was, till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning. He opened the doors of his house, went out to go his way. And the woman, she's fallen down at the door of the house. Her hands were upon the threshold. And he says unto her, up, let us be going. And again, I'm just blown away by this. The casualness with which he just says, come on, let's go. Are you kidding? Nobody answered. So he took her and he went home, and when he was come to his house, he does another just unimaginable thing, and yet it gets the attention of the tribes, as we'll see in the next chapter. We'll stop here at the end of chapter 19. He takes a knife, he divides her 12 pieces, one to go to each tribe of Israel. And everybody that saw it, verse 30 said that there was no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider of it, take advice, and speak your minds. He sends those pieces of this corpse all over Israel, and he says, you see what's done? This is supposed to be our own brethren. You would think it was the wiser decision to stay in a city of your own people as opposed to the Jebusites, but not so in this case. Why is he so upset? Is he so upset about his reputation or for the wrong of these men? We don't know. But this is the dark ages of Israel. And, of course, it's going to lead to a war, a civil war breaking out in the next chapter. We'll pick up there, Lord willing, next Sunday. Thank you very much for your time and attention. The dark ages of Israel, indeed, huh?